Sherto asked me to begin with a little bit of a personal introduction. And so why am I here? I'll share four things. I think first I'm here because I had the blessing of being born into a family and a faith community that taught me at a very early age that God is love, that we're all children of God, and that we're here most fundamentally to learn how to love. My hope and prayer for all the children of the world is to be given as their birthright that sense of the sacredness of things. Then I'm here because I have 4 and about to be 5 beautiful grandchildren, all under the age of 6. And when I look at them, my heart just goes out with this sense that my generation has made a mess of things. And I want to spend the rest of the time I have trying to do everything I can to create a world in which they and all children and the natural world can flourish. Then I'm here because my professional experience up until about 7 years ago when I took up this job was all in the world of Washington politics and advocacy. And I watched that world move further and further out of harmony to the point where I realized there is no political solution, really where I came to the conclusion that the Prime Minister shared with us that all of our ideology has to be working against polarization. As a friend of mine says, we don't need to go left or we don't need to go right, we need to go deeper. And get underneath our political ideologies and find that shared moral vision of a world in which the reality is harmony and flourishing for all people and for the natural world. Finally, I'm here because I feel the pull, the same pull that all of you, I assume, felt of something larger than ourselves calling us to this work. I guess I'm also here because Fetzer, given our mission and who we are, could not be here. A word about us, the outside world would describe us as a foundation, a very dry term. I like to describe us as an inclusive, spiritually grounded community of love and hope that's working in microcosm on the problem that's facing all of humanity, which is how can we find a shared spiritual place to stand as we try to build a global community, and at the same time recognize and honor that we get to that spiritual common ground on very different paths that shouldn't divide us but should enrich us. So as Pastor Johnson, as you said in that wonderful quote from Paul Tillich, how do we go to the depths of each of our spiritual paths and find the deeper truth that unites us all? So with that as background, so you have a little sense where I'm coming from. First, I'll interject as I left my room on the way over here. I found this door hanger, your standard hotel door hanger. But what does it say? It says, can you believe it? It says, "Feed my soul." This is the branding message from Radisson Hotels. That I think tells you something very deep that really connects with what Nicole was talking about us as a global culture, feeling this sense that it's time to knit that chrysalis in which we all metamorphise together into the next beautiful vision of the human family. And so I take great hope from the fact that that's in our culture, it's in our mass culture in a way that should give us all hope. So we have 3 organizing questions here. How do we understand the connection between harmony and sustaining peace? I got them out of order here. How might harmony inspire transformative practices of global governance? And then what practical steps might global leaders adopt to inspire trust, harmony, and peace? I want to speak briefly to each of those. I'm going to take questions 2 and 3 in reverse order because that's the way I experience the logic of the questions. But harmony, I think of it as bringing discrete forces or persons or communities into right relationship, into loving communion, if you will, into the relationship through which each and all can nurture the flourishing of all. So the relationship between harmony and sustaining peace, I see them as synonyms. That if we can come into right relationship with ourselves, as Sister Gianti said, with spirit, with each other, and with the natural world, we achieve harmony, we achieve sustained peace. And so they're outcomes, I would say, to which we have to work. I think we can all agree we live in a world that is, at least if you read the papers and experience it at the macro level, in great disharmony. So I think we need to understand, first off, what are the deep sources or causes of that disharmony. And I would say, and this is our Fetzer premise, that they go all the way to the ground, the fundamental philosophical ground of how do we try to understand the nature of this reality into which we are all born, this mystery. So the first question is, what are the tools? What are the ways of knowing that we have at our hands to try to understand reality? And that's where I think we face the most fundamental and profound disharmony. If you think of the scientific and rational and spiritual ways of probing the nature of reality, I'd say since the Enlightenment, we in the West and increasingly around the world have been in love with science and rationality. And for good reason, because we have achieved incredible mastery over the material world to the great benefit of humanity. But I think we've failed to recognize the huge price we've paid for this love affair with science and reason, because we have, in the process, I think, lost the confidence of our spiritual intuitions in a way that has caused us to lose our sense of deep meaning, purposefulness, and most fundamentally, just the sacredness of things. And so I think part of what the world is crying out for is reclaiming that spiritual way of knowing. The first question is that really a way of knowing? Because you can look at the great traditions and superficially they tell such different stories. You can say, well, how can I have confidence in any of them? But I think the headline for the 21st century is not those first level differences, but their deep convergence. All of the traditions have probed for millennia the deepest questions of human existence, and I think the headline is none of them have come back from this encounter with the ultimate mystery and said, it's meaningless. Eat, drink, and be merry, because there's nothing more than that. Instead, they've all come back in their different ways and said, we live in this deeply interconnected, meaningful, purposeful, sacred reality that has a moral core, that has love at its core. And they've all come back in their own ways and said, the only appropriate human response is some mix of awe and gratitude and reverence and love. And I talked a minute ago about our effort at Fetzer to find that spiritual common ground for the global community. And I think that's it. That's our shared sacred story. It's this shared affirmation that we do indeed live in a sacred reality, that every human person has an infinite sacred dignity, that the natural world is a sacred gift from Spirit to be nurtured and loved. So I think the most fundamental thing we have to do is bring our ways of knowing back into right relationship, out of which I think emerges this sense of the profound sacredness of everything. So if that's where we start, then this question of what are the practices that leaders can put in place to help work toward this vision of harmony and sustainable peace? And it says global leaders, I should have injected, and I recall that because what I want to say is we need to think differently about who's a global leader. We need to understand that each of us is a global leader. Each of us every day in everything we do creates the global culture. And I think, as has been lifted up several times already, I think the most profound thing that each of us as global leaders needs to do, first off, is go deep inside and seek that deep harmony with spirit and with our deeper selves that will allow us to engage each other not from an ego-centered place of separation and fear, but from an all-centered place of wholeness and love. So we're doing a lot of work, very practical in the trenches work, under an initiative we're calling Healing the Heart of American Democracy. And the most profound thing we're trying to do is reframe the conversation to say that it is all about love. That we talk about loving America, and what we say is it's impossible to love America in the abstract. One can only love Americans, and that means all Americans. And so one of the things we're doing is working with one of the big civil society organizations that has a longstanding commitment to leadership development, and with our encouragement and support and collaboration, they're now taking the bold step of saying publicly, there's a new critical dimension to leadership development, and it's that inner spiritual work that will allow us as civil society leaders to engage the world not from that angry advocate's perspective that does more harm than good, but from this place of love and commitment to reconciliation. We're bringing faith leaders together to ask them, why is it that so often you and your communities have shown up as part of the polarizing dynamic in our politics? Surely your deep faith commitments call all of us to be part of the reconciling solution. So I think that's what I'll say about practices. Let's not talk about practices for others. Let's talk about our own internal practice. And then the third question, and I've gotten to the age where I need my glasses. How might harmony inspire transformative practices? No, wait a minute. What practical steps might global leaders adopt? Anyway, you get the drift. I think it is to recognize that we have to connect this inner life, this development of our own capacity for love and compassion, with a fierce determination to transform the systems that are creating the profound disharmonies in the world. If you look out in the world and say, what systems are out of alignment with human flourishing in its deepest sense, I think you conclude pretty much all of them, whether it's our educational system or our healthcare system or perhaps most profoundly our economy. We have this economic model that defines human flourishing in this curiously one-dimensional way, that it's all about income and acquisition and consumption, when we all know from our profound lived experience that that's the most superficial level of human flourishing. So how do we move from a world where we measure progress by growth in income and GDP to a world in which we as leaders say we have to have a multidimensional understanding and multidimensional metrics that measure human well-being in its holistic sense. And I know many of you all have already embraced that multiple bottom line idea of flourishing as the basis for your work. I think I'll just end by saying that I have great optimism because I think millions of people around the world are being pulled by the same forces that have pulled us here to this realization that something new is wanting to be born, is needing to be born, that can carry us as a human family in that next big step in our spiritual journey. And we just need to find each other and realize that when we connect all the dots, we are the beginning of a powerful global movement that is working on all of the big problems from a deeply spiritually grounded place. As Radisson Hotels remind us, the world is crying out to have us feed our souls, and we can do that, not alone, but together. And as a person of faith, I say, with the understanding that there is something much, much bigger than ourselves that is the wind beneath all of our wings. And so what a wonderful thing. And the last thing I'll say is the most wonderful thing about this work is the people you get to do it with. So again, my gratitude to each of you all, and I hope that before this 3 days is out, I will have a chance to connect with a lot of you just individually. So thank you.